can this help you grow? Yeah, this thing happened and it's tough, but what did we learn from this, right? Because, on the other side of anything that's negative, there's something that's positive. And so that would be my best piece of advice is just go out there and give it your best shot, because like I said, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And you have to, when you become an entrepreneur, when you become someone who, is leading others, you take on that responsibility, and therefore you have to show up every single day, the best that you can show up. And that's not always easy to do.
Yep.
It's not always easy to do personally, professionally, all of those things, but you still have to do it.
Welcome to the Brainwaves podcast by Opus, where we sit down with industry leaders to unpack their journeys, explore key challenges, and talk about how they're shaping the future of behavioral health and healthcare technology. I'm your host, Sean Rickenbacker. Today, we're joined by Ajita Shah, a licensed professional counselor, perinatal mental health certified specialist, and the founder of Innerspace Counseling, a state licensed mental health practice in New Jersey, providing partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient programs for children, adolescents, and adults. Ajita spent over a decade as an executive director in behavioral health and worked in both psychiatric inpatient care and outpatient settings before launching Innerspace Counseling in 2013 to offer intensive community-based care for acute mental health needs. She has since built Innerspace as a female-owned organization, and she's passionate about empowering women in a field where most clinicians are women, but leadership is still largely male. We're also joined by Melissa Maranzano, Administrative Director at Innerspace. With more than 20 years of experience in nonprofit and mental health, Melissa has been instrumental at Innerspace since 2018, leading program planning, quality assurance, administration, billing, marketing, and community outreach. She's dedicated to building strong community relationships and improving outcomes for children and families affected by abuse, poverty, and mental health challenges. Through a trauma-informed lens, Melissa trains professionals and community members alike, equipping them with the tools and knowledge to strengthen homes, schools, and neighborhoods. Ajita and Melissa, again, thanks so much for joining me today. Of course, welcome.
Excited to be here. So this is great. Yeah, thanks for
Glad to
having
hear
us.
Glad to hear it. I'd love to start with your journey. I know that both of you have been in multiple care settings and leadership roles, but Ajita, what led you to found Innerspace Counseling?
As you mentioned, Sean, I've been doing behavioral health care for a very long time, about 20 years of dedication to the field. And more than half of that has been in leadership roles at other organizations and larger organizations, smaller organizations. What I notice both in the inpatient and outpatient settings is that there is a huge gap in care, and oftentimes, the different aspects of the industry, whether it be the business side of things or the clinical side of things, generally tend to have some sort of lag or something lacking. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but I'm a firm believer in that idea that, you got to be the change you want to see in the world. Gandhi said that most profoundly, so if you want to do something different, if you want to see something change, then you just have to go ahead and do something about it. And that was sort of the drive behind doing this. That and the fact that, throughout my life, I've had several family members who struggled with mental health themselves, and to watch a system so, consistently fail them because the resources aren't in place, or, the providers are not equipped essentially to service their needs, it's heartbreaking. And so for me, this is not only a personal journey, but this is a professional journey, and whatever impact I can make during my time in this world, I'm going to try to do that. So that was the goal. And here we are, almost 12 years later. So it's very exciting, and I'm so proud of what we've all built. Like, this isn't just me. I'll never say that because, it took a huge team of people behind me to build Innerspace and make it what it is today. So I am so proud of everybody that is part of this organization.
Love that. Love that. And obviously, it's been a journey, like you said, almost 12 years. It's crazy that it's been that long since 2013. Melissa, since you joined in 2018, how's the team evolved in your time here, especially compared to the overall time at Innerspace?
I think the team has just gotten stronger and, has done we do incredible work with their clients and created such a supportive atmosphere for not only the clients, but their families and for one another as clinicians. I think a team, builds a lot of trust when they work with each other for so long too. So I think we all trust one another with each other's professional endeavors and with each other's clients. We all work very closely together in the environment, through group counseling and individual counseling. So the whole team really has their hand in each client, so it takes a lot of like trust and collaboration, and I think that's just gotten stronger and it's evolved into more specialties, and seeing people expand their knowledge and skill set is incredible.
Obviously, one thing I hear speaking with leaders all the time is you have to find people that you trust, always working to work together as a team. Teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Yeah,
Yes, 100%.
So,
absolutely.
and since you both have spent quite a bit of time in leadership in behavioral health thing, Ajita and I spoke prior to this call talking about how a lot of the behavioral health workforce is mostly women, but leadership positions haven't reflected that. Why do you feel that gap exists, and what has been your experience as a female in leadership in the behavioral health space?
Well, I mean, I can start by answering that in a sense that, at least in my experience coming up in this field, and obviously things are ever evolving. So the hope is that, things are constantly changing and they're moving in a positive direction for everyone. But lack of mentorship, lack of representation. So, seeing other women in those leadership roles and being inspired by that, or being able to see yourself in those roles. I think at least when I was coming up in the field, it was not very common to see that. And I think that representation matters because that's what gives you the encouragement to pursue those types of roles and feel like you can actually have those types of roles. And then also mentorship, like having someone that, says, I'm going to guide you through this process and I'm going to be there for you and I'm going to help, bring you up and cheer you on and, help motivate you to reach your goals. The third thing, I would say is really just I think as women, we have an extra challenge of having to balance, our professional lives and our personal lives. I know Melissa has 2 kids. I have 3, and it's hard. It's hard to juggle being a parent, being a wife, being a daughter, and, managing an organization. And I think, sometimes that's really hard for women, especially to see themselves being able to do. And so I think if we're talking specifically about the challenges that women face, I mean, I would say those are some of the things that, I've personally had to juggle and figure out and overcome to a certain extent.
Yep.
So yeah, that would be my answer. I don't know, Melissa, if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit all the major points. The only thing I would add is also having someone in a leadership position be that example of someone juggling all of the different facets of our life and having the feeling like the grace of I have an emergency with a family member or my child that I need to attend to, because we all know how it feels, so you feel more comfortable going to them with that. So I think that's incredibly important and has been helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I love what both of you said. Obviously, it's super important to have a representation and a mentor. My wife and I speak often about obviously, she has a very different experience in the workforce than I do. She experiences a lot of different stigmas than I do and a lot of different headwinds than I do. And I think, as you both mentioned, being parents, there is this expectation in society for women to be the main caretakers. And career is kind of stepping away from that. And now this is something you're having to balance. Whereas, men have been parents and in the workforce in the US the entire time, but they are not expected to juggle it. They just get to work. And this is just extra expectations that women have. So it's awesome to see the work that you've done.
And, I think culturally we're changing as a society. I think that those roles that were typically male versus female are shifting to becoming more equal. So hopefully as society progresses, as, our knowledge improves, I think that, down the road we're going to see a lot of changes in expectations and dynamics and societal norms. And that's a great thing, I think, because I think culturally we all just have to keep evolving. Otherwise we're going to stay stuck somewhere, but one of the things that this particular topic is really important to us because, one of my subspecialties is I'm a perinatal mental health specialist. And, um, because as a mom, I can personally relate to how hard it is to leave your kids at home and go to work and be in a demanding career and do all of the things. I have a certain empathy and a certain soft spot for moms, especially new moms who are trying to figure it out and juggle and do all of these things. And so, New Jersey, we're actually the only intensive outpatient and partial care program that specializes in treating the perinatal mental health population. That's something that's very special for us because I think those are very vulnerable women who are going through a very big transition in their lives. And, as women, I think it's important to support them and provide them a space where they can feel heard and not judged and get the help that they need because unfortunately, that's a very underserved population. Just kind of adding to the fact that, there's not a lot of representation from that standpoint. This is something that we're very passionate about and we want to do something about. So we're hoping that, to build more awareness around perinatal mental health conditions and support that population.
I love that. I love that.
That's also why it's so important to have female owned, organizations available because we can see certain gaps that may be missing and be able to step in and treat
Yeah,
that.
I love that. And obviously, the two of you are mentors to people that work at Innerspace, but in a way, you two being in leadership in your organization, you're a mentor, a role model for the young people in your community. I live in a very culturally conservative area. I live in Utah. And a lot of the women here struggle when they have kids to feel like they can enter the workforce. There's a lot of societal pressure, like mom guilt, towards going back
Mom
to
guilt
work.
is real. It's
Yeah.
very real and it's so hard.
What would the two of you say to these women that, they feel like they are almost forced to stay at home with the kid just because of these societal pressures? Help encourage them to still pursue their passions and like helping the community.
You know, Go ahead, Melissa. I'll let you start with
Yeah.
this.
No, I would just say, to be true to yourself. And, if you have a passion and you have career goals, I think being in communication with your partner, I mean, one of the strengths definitely for me, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I know Ajita's husband as well. Like we have supportive systems in our families that help us. And we still struggle with mom guilt.
Yep.
So I think communicating with your partner and being clear that you do have these goals and you want to work together so that you can both achieve your life goals and having a path for that. Creating a sense of community is really important because you do need support. No one can do everything all the time by themselves. It's hard to, there's always you can do everything and you can do anything, but you can't always necessarily do it all at once, right? So we need support in order to be able to juggle everything.
And
Absolutely.
so I definitely agree with the sense of community. Community is so important. Supports are so important. I think without it, it makes it a lot harder to, work through some of those feelings. I think also, giving yourself a lot of grace because, trade-offs are going to happen, and there are going to be times where, you have to prioritize one thing over the other thing. And, everything may not be handled perfectly in the way that you had hoped or wanted, but that's okay, and it's important to recognize that you're doing your best. It's important to recognize that you're not alone and that, give yourself that grace because, as people, we are not perfect and, we can't, it's hard to live up to an expectation, that is almost impossible to meet. I think recognizing that that's important is a big thing.
Absolutely. What Melissa said specifically about communication between you and your partner got me thinking. And I'm always surprised whenever I have one of these conversations with people that are in the behavioral health space, how it's kind of like a therapy session for me. But obviously, my wife, she's back to work at this point. We've got an 18-month-old daughter who we love dearly. She's fantastic. Obviously, I'm doing my best in trying to support her and her dreams. She's going back to school and work, so she's super busy, and I'm picking up a lot more of our household stuff and making sure to support her as best I can. But what advice would you give to someone in my position in order to support their wife or their partner in that stage of life?
I think
So
taking some I'm sorry.
oh, no, it's okay. Go ahead, Melissa. It's okay.
I was gonna say take some like initiative to ask and check in if there's anything that they need, if there's more that you can be doing, and don't leave all of the communication to her to ask for things. And I think look for everything to be 50-50, and doesn't necessarily mean you do half the cleaning, she does half the cleaning. Like maybe, you clean more, she does more dishes, like, like do more, waking up at night with the baby, or, just so that all of the tasks are, taken care of as best as they can be, and you're equally putting in your part wherever fits best.
Yeah. And, I mean, I think, open communication and just being present is really important. Also, there comes a certain sense of guilt. Oftentimes, the women that I work with or that I speak to, they feel guilty to ask for help. They don't want to feel like they're not doing their part. They don't want to feel like, they're not doing what society expects them to do as parents or mothers. And so it's really hard to ask for help. It's really hard when you're feeling that guilt to say, I need this, right? And so it's important to, just recognize that, it, it may not always be verbal, and it may not always be, hey, honey, can you do this or can you do that? It may be, just a look or, I'm exhausted or, maybe she hasn't eaten, today or something. It could be anything. So, paying attention and noticing, her behaviors, her feelings, her nonverbal communication is really important as well, to the best of your ability, of course, and then finding ways to support, like Melissa said, taking that initiative to, do things that, maybe she hasn't asked you to do, and so that would be a good place to
Plan a
start.
little fun time together.
Yes.
When you have little ones, you need a little time away, just the two of you, to stay connected.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, not to make this about myself, but my wife and I's anniversary is this week. So we've got this fun date planned, and it's been difficult to find time to, have us time, especially with both of us being so busy. But enough about me. I did want to ask, obviously, since both of you been at Innerspace, I imagine this is drastically different from where you've worked in the past. Obviously, this is something that is Ajita's, like, I don't want to say brainchild, but something that you've come up with. It's something you push
It's my
for.
first baby. I
Yeah,
always
your
with
first
that.
baby.
Yeah.
I guess, what sets Innerspace apart, let's say operationally, from the other behavioral health practices that you both have worked at in the past?
I mean, personally, for me, I think it's the, boutique service that we offer, the individualized care. Innerspace is a small organization. We don't have large group sizes. We don't have hundreds of staff. It's a small organization, but I think we make a great impact because our therapists are all committed to the vision, the mission, and they have a why. If I ask any of my clinicians why they're in this field, they're able to easily tell me why they do the work that they do. So they have something that internally drives them to do the good work. And each of them, I think, brings something unique to the table as far as what they offer our clients. They take the initiative to not just know the clients on their caseload, but to know all of the clients and build a connection. And I think in that way, what it allows is for our clients to feel like they've not just come to a place to receive treatment, they've come to a safe space. They've come to a place that feels like home and that feels where they feel cared for. And I think that's the thing I'm most proud of. And I'm just, you know, um, like makes me feel the best at night, when I go to bed because, um, it's really about the people. It's about the people that you have and what they bring to the table and how committed they are to doing the work and caring about the people that they care for.
And it's like you said before, with supporting women best, it's obviously building that community, building that trust. And it sounds like you all have built that for your patients. So I love that.
Absolutely.
As far as Innerspace goes, obviously we've talked about what makes you unique, but what are maybe some unique challenges that you've had to overcome and somebody in your position would have to overcome if they want an organization like Innerspace?
Well, I think recognizing that, it is going to be challenging. You're going to doubt yourself along the way. You're going to face roadblocks and you have to face them. Melissa knows me for 7 years now, so she's seen me, have highs, she's seen me have lows, and she's, seen me, really rack my brain on a lot of challenges, whether they be financial, whether they be practical, whether they be clinical, and it's about recognizing that it is a big responsibility. And you have to, when you become an entrepreneur, when you become someone who, is leading others, you take on that responsibility. And therefore, you have to show up every single day, the best that you can show up. And that's not always easy to do.
Yep.
It's not always easy to do personally, professionally, all of those things, but you still have to do it. And I would say the biggest thing that I've learned, throughout this place, throughout this whole time of like having inner spaces, that, your operations matter. So you can be a great clinician, you can have great clinical skills, but you also need to have a strong infrastructure. You have to have strong operations. You have to really understand how to set yourself up with really good policies and protocols and structure so that not only can you create growth, but you can sustain growth. And I think that is something that I've had to learn along the way because, I mean, grad school teaches you how to be a great clinician or teaches you how to be a clinician. And then your experience teaches you how to be a good clinician.
Yep.
But then, there's also this additional piece of things when you want to become an entrepreneur, and you have to take the effort to learn and get the people in there that have the expertises that you don't. And that's important to recognize. I fully acknowledge that I don't know everything, and I really trust my team to help me fill in the gaps because they do. I don't know where I'd be without them.
And obviously, like we've talked about with trust and building the right team, and now you mentioned building the right structures and processes to set yourself up for success. Melissa, I'm curious. Obviously, you've been on a good portion of this journey with Ajita. What has been your perspective on the main things that you've learned working at Innerspace compared to, I guess, if you could go back and prep yourself for this journey, what would you say to Melissa back in 2018?
I mean, I've definitely grown and learned a lot through Innerspace. I came from, more of a nonprofit social service background. So coming specifically into mental health, I hadn't really been in a healthcare organization before this. So just really getting to know the structure, the process, the all of the you know, entities that affect you. You have, state involvement and, you know, licensing and, we got Joint Commission accredited recently in the last few years. It's There are so many pieces to the puzzle that you have to be aware of. Even as you're like making decisions, you have to look back at what those requirements are. You deal with, insurance companies and laws and, you're dealing with a lot of things that affect your day-to-day work and, affects patients' lives. Advocacy is a big piece for me personally. So, trying to advocate for, improvements in healthcare, is a big passion of mine.
Obviously, like we are always looking to improve. And it sounds obviously you two have built a fantastic organization, making sure people feel like they belong and advocating for them. I did want to circle back on something. I know that you talked about the importance of having a mentor. If you had to give advice to someone who's a leader on being a mentor for these young women, these young girls who are going to be growing up to be in more leadership positions, what advice would you give?
Well, to anybody who's kind of looking into going into leadership positions, you know, it's important to remember that your perspective matters, and that Even if you don't think you have anything to offer, you do. And, it's important to, um, recognize that you do belong, even in rooms where there might not be other women, even in rooms where you think you don't belong. You do belong because your perspective matters. I would always encourage any young girl or woman or anyone to really just put yourself out there. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain by trying. And it's important that you do because that's how we build representation. That's how we get out there. That's how things improve. That's how things change by having those different perspectives and advocating and taking the risks. I mean, look, doing anything in life there's a risk associated with it. You're going to have a risk and, drive a car, you have a risk. You go down the street, you have a risk. It doesn't matter what you do, you have a risk. So why hold yourself back from doing that? And, for the other leaders out there, I would just say, encourage people to do the things because, I always tell my team, it's really important to look at what can you gain from this experience? How can this help you grow? Yeah, this thing happened and it's tough, you know, but what did we learn from this? Right? Because, on the other side of anything that's negative, there's something that's positive. And so that would be my best piece of advice is just go out there and give it your best shot because like I said, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I would, yeah, I was going to say, I would recommend you have to be open to learning. Look at the people around you, what their, lower level employee, higher level employee leadership. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. So find people's strengths to not only help build them up, but also to learn from. Ajita and I have different skill sets. There are things that I'm going to turn to her for. There are things she's going to turn to me for. So, you learn to like create partnerships and relationships that will help you in the long term. And we have connections from people we've worked with 20 years ago that we still have today. So,
I
you
still
know,
call up, "Hey, I've never faced this. Can you give me some thoughts on how we can" and it's important. It's important to network. It's important to have connections. It's important to learn from others. I think, the only way that you reach your goals is by, constantly looking for opportunities for growth and having a growth mindset because otherwise, you might find yourself in a very stuck position and and the opportunities, become limited at that point.
And both the advice that both of you have given is fantastic advice across the board. I think not just for women in the setting, but I think for men. One thing, obviously, a lot of things I've noticed coming from a culturally conservative area is a lot of women almost are expected to minimize themselves, like minimize their achievements, take up less space. But it sounds like it's super important to get out there, go do the things, find mentors, network, and
yes, cut that out. We don't do
yeah,
that.
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
that. Love that. We're coming up on time. I want to be respectful. I know that it's a busy season, but I always ask this question and I expect it to take a little bit longer since there's two of you. Do you have any book recommendations?
So, there's this book that I recently read. It's called Extreme Ownership. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't have the author's name on it. So I don't know if that's something that we can pull up.
Jocko Willink?
Yes, 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 yes.
Yes.
Name always escapes my brain. Um, Extreme Ownership, it's a really, really interesting perspective. It was written by a Navy SEAL. And it's really, I think it offers a very interesting perspective on leadership, and accountability as a leader and kind of looking at, how giving you perspective on your role as a leader in terms of guiding others. And, I think I really enjoyed reading that book and I think it gave me a lot of like, strategies and just general, perspective, how I can better support my team as a whole. And, you know, I don't know. I think it's a great book.
Awesome. I've actually read that book. I 100% agree with you. I love it. I'm not going to give my own review, but I think you did a great job at doing an overview. So
Yeah.
it's definitely high on the list for me.
Yes, definitely worth a read for sure.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoy reading books about just female leaders or females that I admire because I enjoy seeing the journey. I enjoy when they like talk about their youth and how they grew into their positions, whether it's like Michelle Obama's books or Melinda Gates or whoever. I enjoy reading stories of how they became who they are and what drove them to their positions.
Think of that. Well, thank you both for your time. It's been a great conversation talking about inner space and, of course, your journeys. But I really
Thank you for
appreciate
having
having you
us.
on.
This has been
Yeah,
great.
thank you.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. And obviously, I'll probably reach out again because you guys have been great. But thanks so much for spending the time with me today.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.